Here's some bad news. And again, this is one of those deals where, it's hard to exaggerate the disappointment at this, because we really thought with the addition of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court that at last judges were going to stop legislating from the bench like Judge Roberts did with Obamacare. But Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion in this case, which was just blatant legislation from the bench. And Sam Alito and Brett Kavanaugh called the majority 6-3 that transgenders, that employers cannot take sexual depravity into account in hiring and firing decisions. They cannot take sexual depravity, sexually depraved conduct or lifestyles. Employers now can no longer take that into consideration when they set personnel policy in hiring and firing decisions. So this is a bad, bad, bad ruling. This is as bad as the Obergefell ruling, because in essence what this did, when I was in Idaho, I worked with the Idaho Families Alliance, and we spent a lot of time turning back what are called SOGI laws, sexual orientation, gender identity laws. This is an effort on the part of regressives on the left. Remember, I call them regressives because they claim they're taking us forward, but they are taking us backwards. They're taking us backwards into paganism is what they're doing, not progressive at all. So we spent a lot of effort in keeping them from passing a law that would prohibit employers from taking sexual orientation or gender identity into account. Now, all of that, there's 29 states still in America today that have had the wisdom not to do that. They just got tossed under the bus. Supreme Court with Neil Gorsuch and John Roberts in cahoots said, no, you don't get to choose. You don't get to govern your own people. The Constitution is utterly silent on whether transgenders get special rights or not. It doesn't say a word about it. What does the 10th Amendment say? If it's a right that's not given to the federal government in the Constitution, it belongs to the states and to the people. So the right to decide what they're going to do with people who are engaged in sexually depraved lifestyles, that's up to each individual state to decide. And John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch, shame on him. They said, no, the Constitution means bupkis to us. We don't care about the 10th Amendment. We don't care about applying the law, because the law that they rewrote is a law that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. Does not say you cannot discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. And Alito and Kavanaugh both pointed out, look, if this law is going to be changed, it's not up to the Supreme Court to do it. We have no authority to do this, because remember, all legislative power is vested in Congress. That's a quote from the Constitution of the United States. All legislative power is invested in Congress, the Congress of the United States. And that law that Congress passed in 1964, it uses the word sex, and what it means when they wrote it was male and female, biological sex. That's what it meant. And remember, we're looking for Supreme Court justices who will apply the Constitution, not legislate law from the bench, because remember, that's their job. The job of the Supreme Court is to simply take the law that is passed by Congress and apply it. When they use the word, it's the job of judges to interpret the Constitution, absolutely, flatly, that is wrong. Brr. It's not their job to interpret the Constitution. That scares me half to death, because I've seen what people do when they think they have the authority to interpret the Scriptures, and they know better than the authors of the Scripture what it means. So anyway, this is a terrible, horrible, no good, very, very bad decision. This is just as bad as Obergefell, because now they have forced the acknowledgement, the normalization of sexually depraved behavior and lifestyles into all 29 states that had been holding the line. Now, one of these companies that was affected was a funeral home in Michigan. And they had a male. She changed her name to a female name, but he was a male. He was a male the day he was born. He's now dead, but he was a male till the day he died. He was a male all the time he worked at this funeral home. And the funeral home director was told, this guy went to the funeral home director and said, I'm just feeling like I'm a female, and so I'm going to start dressing as a female. There's not one single thing about this guy that even looked remotely female. He looked like a guy wearing a dress. And the funeral home director said, look, I'm not going to be able to do that. I mean, I like you. I don't have a beef with you. But I have people coming to this funeral home, and they are grieving the loss of a loved one. This is a time for them to grieve and to mourn and to find hope. It's just not fitting to have a man in here who's wearing a dress and lipstick into this environment. It affects the environment that we are trying to create here. I'm going to have to let you go. Well, now, Supreme Court just told every funeral home director, you got to hire a flaming transgender. Somebody comes in, a guy comes into your store, and he's wearing high heels and a dress and dangly earrings and says he wants to work for you. You got to hire him. You can't not hire him. You'd be violating the wisdom of the United States Supreme Court if you do this. And the odd thing, this is right after the Trump administration. Now, the Trump administration executive order just has to do with health policy. But the Trump administration on Friday just enacted or announced a rule, an executive order, that would prevent insurers from taking sexual orientation and gender identity into account in issuing insurance policies or health care coverage. The Trump administration said that sex discrimination applies only to someone who faces discrimination for being male or female. Does not deal at all with the issue of discrimination against somebody because of a sexually perverse lifestyle. So the Supreme Court just threw all that under the bus, says you will do as we say, not as the Constitution says. So who violated the Constitution here? Who violated the Constitution? It was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the one that violated the Constitution here. They're the ones that are in violation of the Constitution. Now, I'm a believer. You know, the Constitution says that the Supreme Court is only to settle cases and controversies that come before it. Okay, I disagree with that, but let's go with that just for the sake of argument. If their authority is restricted to settling cases or controversies, then their authority in this case is restricted to ruling on the claims of the sexually depraved people that were looking to them for relief. So the three plaintiffs in this case, they would be allowed to get what they want because they settled the controversy. They settled the case in their favor. But they did not settle this issue for anybody else. They only have authority over the plaintiffs and the parties that are in front of them. So even then, if we were operating according to the understanding of the founders and according to the authority of the Constitution, then this ruling would be null and void. And two of the three plaintiffs are dead. So they no longer, their cases are no longer even relevant. Those cases ought to be submitted for lack of relevance. They can't benefit from a ruling or a case decided in their favor because they've gone on to whatever awaits them on the other side of life. So anyway, that's the latest from are benighted leaders in the United States Supreme Court. And just to give an example of how important the Trump executive order is, the Housing and Urban Development, HUD, under Ben Carson's leadership, this rule was issued in part to protect women in homeless shelters who were being harassed sexually, and in some cases even abused sexually, by men who were so mentally confused, so mentally ill, so mentally deranged that they thought they were women. So they go to the homeless shelter. They tell the homeless shelter, you got to let us in. You have to let us bunk down with the women. You got to let us take showers with the women. You got to let us use the women's bathroom. And Donald Trump and this executive order said, no, you can't do that. You are perfectly free to take biological sex into account. You know, one of the homeless shelters that was affected is in Anchorage. It's a faith-based shelter. Realize, you know, I don't know what this is going to mean. Because it could mean that not even churches. It might mean that churches will be required to hire homosexual organists. They won't have a choice in the matter. If a homosexual comes to them, they've got a job they're trying to fill, and a homosexual comes and says, "Hey, I'm a transgender. I'm a guy who likes to dress up in women's clothes. We used to call them transvestites, and you have to hire me because the Supreme Court said you do." Well, let's say that gets challenged, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, it's okay for religious organizations. They don't have to be bound by that. What are they saying? They are saying that in their view of the world, not in ours, but in their view of the world, we will allow Christians to be total, absolute bigots. Nobody else gets that opportunity. Nobody else gets our authorization to be bigots, to be total bigots, and to be hate mongers, and to be guilty of hate actions, hate crimes when they hire and fire people. But everybody else has to play by those rules. That's how bad this thing is. And how long will that last anyway? People are going to say, hey, wait a minute. It's not it's not right to allow religious groups to be bigots when we don't allow anybody else to be hate mongers and bigots and commit hate crimes in their personnel policy. We have got to remove that exemption. And trust me, under a Democrat president, that will be yanked and reversed so fast it'll give you a nosebleed. And these leaders of this shelter in Anchorage, Alaska said, look, we have women in this shelter that have been harassed in the private quarters, in the showers, in the private quarters that women use. We've had men harassing them in there. We've got women in this shelter. I mean, they're homeless. They're there because something has happened to them, something traumatic has happened to them in their family of origin, in their original home, that leaves them without a place to live. So they're taking refuge in a homeless shelter. And this Anchorage, the staff on this Anchorage shelter, we have women in this shelter because we're being forced to allow men in here. They have decided they would rather sleep in the woods in Alaska than sleep alongside biological males. You know, in Fresno, California, was another one where they were complaining specifically that a male identifying as a female entered a shelter and showered with women. This is insanity, and we have Neil Gorsuch and John Roberts to thank for it. So, officially, John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch have gone over to the dark side of the force. It's a sad day in America. Be right back.